Hi everyone, welcome to my new webinar series for Fungitopia. So in this series, I'm gonna feature conversations and interviews with experts in the field. And I'm hoping to give you all a new way of looking at fungi, to share different experts' knowledge and stories in a way that helps us all understand why fungi are so important, not just in science, but in our everyday lives. So our first guest is David Babik, who is the president of Boston Mycological Club, which happens to be the oldest mycology club in the US. He's actually a lawyer, but has developed a passion for mycology over time. He spent years leading foraging walks, teaching beginners, and making mycology fun for a lot of people. Thank you, David, for being part of this interview. Your insights are very
Sure.
valuable to us.
Thanks. So where do you want to start?
Okay, so I first want to start by asking how you got interested in fungi. So I know you're coming from a law background, and law and mycology are very different fields. So I'm wondering what first pulled you into the world of mushrooms, or like if
Well,
there.
so to answer that it's always in the back of my mind as something I wanted to do because when I was a kid, my father used to hunt mushrooms, and his father hunted mushrooms before him. So I feel like it's in my genes, and but when I went out with him as a kid, I never really knew what he was doing. I never really learned anything about mushrooms, and he didn't speak a lot of English either. He's from Poland, and we'd go out in the woods, and I'd just point to things and go grab it for him, and he would cut it off at the stem and touch it to his tongue and then either throw it back in the woods or throw it in his basket. And that's all he ever did. I never really knew why or what he was tasting for. But so it was kind of, in the back of my mind, I'd see mushrooms. I'd think, oh, I wonder if I could eat that,
Mhm.
but really, I never really did anything with it. I went to law school, and believe it or not, after law school, I ended up working in a bonsai nursery growing Japanese bonsai trees for over a decade before I went back into the legal world. But um, at one point, I was in probably in my 40s, and we were camping with another family up in Royalston, Mass, Lake Tully, and there were mushrooms everywhere. It rained all week, and there were just big, colorful mushrooms everywhere I looked. And so I grabbed a handful of these ones that looked really good to me and brought them back to the campsite. I said, I'm going to cook these up, and we're going to have them for dinner. And everybody's like, no way, we're not eating those. You shouldn't eat them. You're going to die. And I said, no, I have a really good feeling about this. And they're like, no, it's way too dangerous. Don't do it. And
Mhm.
so I said, no, I'm going to do it. You guys don't have to eat any, but I'm going to do it. Next thing I know, they had the ranger over there, and the ranger was saying, "You better not eat those mushrooms." Last time a guy thought he knew about mushrooms, he ended up in the hospital, and you should put them back. So I said, "All right, give up." I threw them back in the woods. I said, "I'm going to buy a book, and I'm going to learn which ones you can eat." So when I bought a book, I suddenly realized there's hundreds of thousands of mushrooms in our woods. Many haven't even ever been named or identified. And so I realized this was not going to be a book. This was going to be a lot more than that. And so I don't do things halfway. I'm not Bulgarian, but there's an old Bulgarian proverb that goes, if you wish to drown, don't torture yourself with shallow water. You should
Mhm.
always just dive in if you want to do something. And so next thing I knew, I had like shelves full of books, and I was cleaning a drawer, and I found an article I cut out of the Boston Globe 2 years earlier about the BMC, the Boston Mycological Club. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to join. I'm going to learn. And so that's how I got started. And when I came to my first walk, there was a guy who used to do ID called George Davis, and he was an older gentleman, knew a lot of stuff. And I went up to him. I said, I want to learn this. Can I just follow you around? I'll learn. I just want to learn what you know. He goes,
Mhm.
sure, you're welcome. You can follow me along. And after about 3 weeks, he just stopped coming. And suddenly I was the ID guy. And so I really had to learn fast because suddenly everybody was asking me questions and can I eat this? What kind of mushroom is this? And so that's when I really dove in full force. And
Mhm.
it's when you volunteer for anything, it's a whirlpool. And next thing I knew, I was president, even though I never thought I'd have time to do it, and I don't. But here I am.
Mhm. I think my interest was not like generational like yours. My parents were not that interested in fungi. But well, one day my mom actually took me on a foraging walk when I was probably 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
And it was a very enjoyable moment because it was a very rainy week, so a lot of mushrooms had popped up, and I still remember the joy of just kind of looking beneath the leaves or
Yeah.
at the tree trunks, and it kind of felt like a scavenger hunt, just kind of looking around and
Kind
finding.
of like a treasure hunt,
Yeah,
you're always
yeah,
and you're always hoping to find stuff, but
hmm
so many times you go out and there's nothing there,
yeah.
and then that one time you go out and suddenly they're everywhere. It just changes your whole perspective on things.
hmm Um, yeah, so ever since then, I've been joining foraging walks, but I think my interests started evolving into more of a scientific pursuit. Like, I really like reading articles and learning about how fungi can lead us into a better future.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's it's we'll probably cross topics here, but it's really, when you get into fungi in general, there's so many different factions.
hmm
There are people that are purely on a scientific level. They never even eat a mushroom. They might study one kind of tiny microscopic mushroom in great detail endlessly, or just hunt for some rare mushroom their whole life, and David Hibbett, who's the mycologist at Clark University, he loves this mushroom, the Lentinus tigrinus, that grows on edges of water like rivers and stuff. And so he takes his class on kayaks on the Essex River looking for just this one particular mushroom. So, people do get obsessed with certain things. And there's people that are into it just for something for dinner. They just want to eat mushrooms. They don't care about learning about them. They just want to know, can I eat it?
hmm
And then there's a big group that is more in there for just a community and like a social thing and getting out in the woods with a bunch of people and making new friends there's a lot of areas, and there's the cooking people and the dyeing people who want to use mushrooms to dye fabric. So that's a whole nother subgroup of mushroom people, and they all find a place.
From what I observed, a lot of people are interested in the more visible parts of nature, like plants and animals. Fungi are usually things that people walk past or just choose to ignore or pay not as much attention to.
Or don't even see.
Yeah, or just don't even see. They usually hide like under the leaves, so it's not even visible.
Yeah.
Um, so why do you think fungi deserve as much attention as plants and animals, even though most people don't recognize them?
Well, first of all, it's one thing is that perspective shifts when you have a rainy season, because all of a sudden our membership shoots up every time there's a rainy year
Mhm,
because people just happen to notice them then, because all of a sudden they're everywhere. And you have things like Cortinarius ioides, which is bright purple, thousands of them in the woods, and things that are bright and colorful, and you can't miss them. And it draws people in, and they start thinking like, "Oh, what is that?" And
mhm,
and they do get drawn in. I think, in general, understanding what fungi are is an evolving science, and in the past, and a lot of our laws are based on the fact that science thought they were plants for a long time, and so all our regulations on the state parks will say no removal of plants, and they still won't allow us to go pick mushrooms there because they say no, you can't remove plants, and we say they're not plants. It's a whole different thing, and they say, well, they're plants, and so it's people don't understand what they're dealing with, and it's much closer to an apple on an apple tree, and you're not hurting the organism. It's much larger and below the ground or in wood when you pick a mushroom, but in general, the general public is way behind the curve on understanding what mushrooms are.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think, well, the reason I started my blog was because I realized that, especially at this high school level, not a lot of people are aware of the importance of fungi. Um, so I kind of decided to change that and raise awareness.
Yeah, it's not taught, but it's not just the high school, it's college level too. Because college mycology is almost never in the requirements for any field of science.
Hmm.
It's almost never there. And I know Professor Mycology, they're very frustrated because it's hard to fill their classes because the students don't get any credits for stuff they need. It has to be a pure elective to take mycology. So
Yeah. So you are the president of BMC. For beginners, can you first explain what a mycological club is and what kinds of events or projects does BMC organize?
sure, sure. Well, first of all, in the early days of the BMC, and I'm not going to go for 200 years of history, but in the early days of BMC, clubs like this were pretty much you had to be a professional in the field to be part of a scientific organization. And BMC was always different in that it embraced people that were just novices or beginners, and you didn't have to have credentials to join. In the early days, you had to be vetted by other members because somebody had to say they're cool, they can come in, you know. Um, but it was always different, and it welcomed people that were from foreign countries, didn't speak good English. It welcomed women, which was unheard of at the time, you know, and they were just so many women like became important additions to the mycological world because it was a field they could participate in and they weren't allowed to in a lot of other fields, you know, and they never got the credit they deserved in the early days, of course, but you know, it's still they contributed a lot, and there were a lot of female mycologists in the early days that really changed the game plan. But so bring it up to current times. Now it's we have over 1,000 members, and you know it could shift up to additional 500 on a rainy year that all just joined for that year. Um, but we do a lot of things. We do during the mushroom season, which is generally late June through late October. We do walks pretty much every week. And we'll take a group of people. We don't make people, we're one of the only clubs in the country that doesn't make people register in advance
Mhm.
and limit the number of people that come. We just open the floodgates and say, if you want to join us, come on in. And sometimes we'll get 20 people at a walk. I've had up to 125 people all show up for a walk, you know, and that's clearly it's a rainy year when how many
Mhm.
people are showing up. But, and so, you know, a lot of them, probably 75% on many of the walks are new to mushrooming and just have kind of like come because they're curious, and some immediately embrace it and just you'll see them every walk after that, and other ones you'll see them once or twice a year, you know, or just a little bit, and some just want to get in a feel for what it's like, and they say, "Oh, I'll do it again," but just, you know, life gets in the way sometimes. But we also do a lot of educational stuff. We'll do classes and lectures. We'll bring in mycologists from around the world and other places and do them either on Zoom or in person. We'll do cooking classes. We'll do microscope classes. We'll have other events like in the spring we do a mushroom hunt in Chinatown where we kind of give everybody a list of here's the mushrooms you need to find. They have to go to all the different stores and herbalists and find these different mushrooms. And we meet up at a Chinese restaurant for a 10-course mushroom banquet at the end, you know, and so
Mhm.
we'll do that every spring. And we have a lot of events like that, like we have a banquet in the fall coming up, and different things appeal to different people. We have coming up in November, we've scheduled something that's going to be a lecture on yeast and how it affects the taste of beer, and we're doing it at a brewery. So probably you can't go to that one, but we're going to do it at a brewery. So they talk about the different yeasts and then show how it helps change the flavor of that particular beer. So you do a beer tasting after you learn about the yeast that created it. So you know, we do a Christmas sale where everybody brings in their stuff they don't use anymore, their old books they're not using, or old shirts or anything, and it just is a giant like swap meet. And we always watch some kind of movie about mushrooms, and
Mhm.
you know, it's so we do a little of everything throughout the year, and we participate in convent. Last year, this shirt actually is from last year. We hosted a regional convention on Cape Cod for like 14 states, and so we ran that, and it's Matsutake season in the Cape in October, so people came from all over because they've never found Matsutake, which is a fairly rare mushroom that's usually prized in Japan, and it likes nutrient poor soil and pitch pines. So Cape Cod is a perfect environment for
Mhm.
it. and they just pop up everywhere. And but they're tricky because they're under the duff, and you have to find the little bump in the duff to dig them out. And so they're fun to hunt for. But so that's that's kind of what we do, and we're all volunteers. So some of us get sucked in for more time than others, but we're always trying to embrace the new members and see who might be willing to go in a little deeper and volunteer for stuff. And we train new walk leaders, and they go out on their own and do walks for local land trusts and schools and lectures and things like that too. So it's spreading and evolving.
Hmm. And which of these events have been the most meaningful or rewarding to you?
Well, I always love the forays, and I love going to conventions. I love going to mushroom conventions, just getting submerged in mushroom hunting for a few days with a bunch of mushroom people. And one of the first forays I ever went to was a regional foray up in Bowdoin, Maine, and it had been a year where it virtually rained almost every afternoon. There was rain almost every day up there, and the amount of mushrooms was just unbelievable. I'd never seen anything like it, and so I got hooked on going to these conventions because they're a lot of fun. You meet new people, and so um, I currently in fact, I think next week sometime I'm flying out to Minneapolis.
Hmm.
Um, I have a friend out there who's in the mycology lab at the university, and so we meet up there, and then we're going to drive to the Great North Woods in northern Wisconsin for a 3-day foray they do up there, way in the backwoods at this old hunting lodge that's in just peak mushroom country, and there's just stuff everywhere. So it's been raining there nonstop the whole month of August. So they're having a banner year. I can't wait to get out there. It's been so dry here.
What are your hopes for the future of the club?
I'd like to see us to be more of a force to change the laws. Um,
Hmm.
and I've been working on that for years. I've testified to Congress multiple times, and they every year they say this is a good idea. We're all behind it. The committees are all behind it. They send it to the floor for a vote, and then it dies before it ever gets to the floor because there's always so many bills fighting to get voted on. And so they keep telling me there's just not enough people out there interested in mushrooms to get it to the floor. So now I'm trying a different route. I'm trying to go to the state parks and see if I can get them to change their guidelines at the regional level. So Massachusetts is way behind the curve. Other states, if you go down to Connecticut, you can go to any state park and pick mushrooms as long as you're not doing it commercially. No permits required, nothing. If you go to Pennsylvania, there's signs at every trailhead that said no removal of plants, but it's fine to pick fungi or berries for personal use. And New Hampshire doesn't care where you go, and as long as you don't pick things on trees that would rip the bark off. So every state is really very pro mushroom, except Massachusetts. We're old pilgrims here, and they still say no, you can't take out plants. And so but we will have an effect sooner or later, and we just keep pushing. And the other part is to try to get more younger people into mycology. When I joined, I was in my 40s, and I was like a youngster in the club. Like there were so many people in their 80s and 90s that had been in the club for years, so that's another thing that's changed. We have a lot more people coming in that are high school and college age, and um, because farm to table has gotten really popular, so people are looking for like organic, sustainable stuff, and mushrooms fit right in there.
Hmm. Um, what are some of the most unusual or beautiful mushrooms you've seen in your foraging walks?
There's a lot of neat stuff, and I think, if you're to ask me what's my favorite mushroom, that answer is going to vary with what day of the week it is and what time of year it is. But um, I remember one time I found a coral mushroom up in northern Vermont that I'd never seen before, and it was incredibly brilliant hot pink, and just the brightest pink you could imagine. It caught my eye from like 20 feet away. I was like, "Holy cow, that can't be a mushroom," and it was. And sometimes you just find stuff that just you can't believe it's a real thing, or some that are like intensely bright purple or different colors. One time I remember I was with a friend up in up in northern Mass, and we're on this trail on a rainy year, and it was on October, and there were mushrooms everywhere. It was like our baskets were full of stuff, and there weren't any oak trees in this forest. And oak trees are a really good one for hen of the woods and a lot of mushrooms that show up in the fall. And so we saw this big oak tree at the bottom of a ravine. So we're like, all right, we got to go look at that oak tree. So we climbed down to the bottom and we didn't see anything around it. We were around the backside and there was a hen of the woods that weighed close to 50 pounds.
Oh.
And so we cut it in half because we each wanted to carry half because we were not going to carry the whole thing all
Mhm.
up the hill. And so we dragged each 25-pound trunk up the hill and got it home. But that was probably the biggest one I ever found. So stuff like that's very exciting. Or when you suddenly round a corner and you see a patch of thousands of black trumpets or chanterelles and just it makes up for all the times when you go out and don't find anything.
Mhm. Yeah, I've done some research about unusual looking fungi. I haven't seen this one in person, but one that really stuck with me was, I think the nickname is bleeding tooth fungus.
Oh yeah, you
Has
find
a
those. They're
white
around a lot. You find them more on the Cape. They like the
plate.
Cape. Yeah, but yeah, it's pretty disgusting looking when you see it. But they have his name like strawberries and cream too, which is much nicer than the bleeding tooth
For
fungus.
sure, yeah.
But yeah, yeah, and there's stuff that's just really really colorful or really large, and
Mhm.
it just different. And one of my favorites was always the cauliflower, which is a really cool little mushroom. And first time I ever found it, I brought it home and I sliced some up and threw them in a frying pan. And my son came down. He said, "Oh, you're making pancakes?" I'm like, "No, mushrooms." He goes, "Oh, disgusting." But it smelled like maple syrup because they had this really maple syrup flavor to
So,
them.
how do you
Mhm.
see fungi shaping the way we approach sustainability and climate challenges?
Well, I think the climate challenges, there's certainly a lot of research going on that's studying what's happening with fungi because fungi could be like three different things for the most part. They could be parasitic, where they're attacking a living plant or tree and killing it, and gradually, slowly, or fast sometimes, depending what kind of mushroom. They could be saprobic, where they're just serving a purpose out in the woods. They're breaking down fallen trees to turn them into soil. Or they could be mycorrhizal. And when they're mycorrhizal, that's the one that causes more research in climate change areas because mycorrhizal mushrooms associate with a particular kind of tree or trees and they exchange nutrients with the tree's roots and they help the trees to survive because most trees' root systems are big fat roots and all the things we think of our root hairs are actually little fungal strands. And so they associate with certain trees and stuff happens. Trees die off, like the chestnut trees at the turn of the century that all died. And right now, hemlock and beech are facing a lot of attacks from insects and disease. And so scientists have been studying like what happens to the mushroom that needs that plant to live when that plant suddenly disappears, or
Mhm.
what happens when that plant no longer can grow because it's getting warmer in its environment. And a lot of these mushrooms are actually shifting to other hosts to switch to other hosts in the area, and it teaches a lot about survival in the face of changing climate conditions over the years. And hopefully, these hot, dry summers are not going to be a permanent thing for us because it's brutal for
Yeah,
mushroom
for
hunting.
sure.
But
Yeah.
it's sustainable and mushrooms as a food group, especially for people that are vegetarians or vegans, are it's huge because they have a lot of nutrition to them and they're very easy to grow. They're very simple to, aside from contamination aspects, because it's very easy to get other mold and other fungus coming in and attacking what you're trying to grow. But if you're growing it in the correct conditions, you can produce a lot of food product in a short time and it dries well, it can survive through the winter, and just, it's very sustainable, easy to grow organically. Certainly you're not going to use any fungicides on them, and and very seldom do you have any insect issues.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
I know
that's
there are a lot of sustainability projects involving fungi, and I think one of the most recent ones I read touched on a project that aimed to create like self-repairing buildings out of mycelium, which is very
interesting. Yeah.
interesting. Um,
Yeah, I mean they have leather, they have mycelium leather, they have Mycelium will probably replace styrofoam in the near future.
Mhm.
There's a lot of companies that actually are growing um, styrofoam containers. So, that would go around a bottle. They'll grow the mycelium around a bottle and take it out and put the bottle in and ship it. And so and also styrofoam popcorn is already slowly being replaced by mycelium-based products. So there's a lot of stuff out there,
For sure.
and also for bioremediation, and oyster mushrooms have an incredible ability to take pollutants out of places and just disperse them, and they're gone, and just um, I saw a lecture one time, a guy that is a farmer, and on the spillways where the water runs off and has all fertilizer and chemicals in it, they put bales of hay inoculated with mushroom spawn there, and the oyster mushrooms just sucked up all the
Oh.
chemicals from there. And they tested the oyster mushrooms, and the chemicals were gone. They weren't in the mushrooms. They just somehow dissolved them, and they were gone.
Yeah, so just like you said, scientists are making clothes, furniture, even packaging out of fungi. What is the wildest or like most exciting use you've seen?
I, you know, I think that the fungal leather is pretty cool. I gotta say, I really did enjoy that mushroom bacon. Uh, they use king trumpet mushrooms, and they they I forget the name, but it's something like shroom bacon or so, I don't know, but they create this bacon. It was on Shark Tank, and it was one they all got excited about because it really does taste like bacon. And it's completely easy to reproduce, and you don't have to kill any poor little piggies to make it. And so
Mhm.
but I thought that one was pretty cool. It was very convincing, and I'd love to see styrofoam gone. That would be a great thing. It's something that just will outlive all of us, and someday maybe all styrofoam will be biodegradable, and you can just throw it out in your garden.
Mhm. For me, I was very surprised to read about fungi's application in space research. It turns out NASA is funding a lot of like projects involving fungi.
Wow.
I think they're used because most fungi can grow in microgravity. Um, they
Yeah,
also,
I mean, they grow everywhere. They grow.
yeah.
There's a guy named Bob Blanchett that's at University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, and he's renowned in the field, but he's an ethnomycologist, and he does a lot of different things with historical fungi. Like he'll go to these. He went to Harvard University, and they have basements filled with stuff down there, and a lot of these. Um, Early primitive masks from like witch doctors and
Mhm.
the uh, the sorcerers of the tribes would wear these unusual masks, and they were always assumed to be made out of wood. And
Mhm.
a great many of them turn out to be fungi.
Really?
And he's going and documenting them, and he was on the cover of Fungi magazine with one he found at Harvard University. That was incredibly bizarre Ganoderma that nobody even knows how it grew in nature. But he helps the museums understand that they have fungal historic record there, and it's not just something somebody carved.
Mhm.
And so there's that whole aspect of it. But he also, I saw a lecture by him where he talked about they go like thousands of feet under the ground, and they're studying fungi in coal mines and in underground mining operations. And there's stuff down there. They're everywhere.
Mhm. Why do you think fungi capture our imagination so much?
Well, there's something kind of magical about the way they appear. Just something's not there one day, the next day you go and it looks like it's been there forever. And the next day it's gone again.
Mhm.
And there's like the Japanese parasol inky, which is a beautiful little delicate mushroom. It shows up on people's lawns on a rainy morning,
Yeah.
and by lunchtime it's gone. And just there's something very ethereal about them. And so people always were intrigued by the fact they would just suddenly appear. And, sometimes suddenly appear could be like that 50-pound hen. That was probably only about 2 or 3 days old. And it
Mhm.
grew so fast and engulfed rocks, sticks. There were salamanders inside it, when I started opening it up. And they just it's incredible how they just appear and suddenly they're everywhere and then they're not. And so I think people are captivated by the fact they don't quite know what's going on, and suddenly there's all these colorful things surrounding them that just have come out of nowhere.
I think they're also fascinating because they're both familiar and alien at the same time.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
on
that's a
one
good
hand,
way to describe it. Yeah.
yeah, because like they're part of your everyday life. You eat them, you see them in nature. Um, they have been used in medicine for centuries. But
Yeah.
like, on the other hand, their biology confuses a lot of people because they don't quite fit into the categories of plants or animals.
Yeah. I mean, they're closer to us than either of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, someday maybe we'll be eaten by cordyceps like The Last of Us, but it's we might like it. Who knows? Um,
My last question is for someone who wants to begin exploring fungi, where should they start and what advice would you give them?
well, I've always thought that like the best way to start is to get a decent beginner book and just kind of get a feel for what it's all about. And the problem is there's thousands of books out there on fungi, and unfortunately, names of them get outdated by the time you finish reading the book, usually, because they're constantly shifting and changing the scientific names of many of these mushrooms. But there's a book called The Complete Mushroom Hunter by Gary Linkoff, who was one of the leaders in the field. He's passed away a few years ago, but he wrote this book, and it was never really appreciated because it's the perfect beginner book. But everybody in the field wanted his more serious field guide, which was put out by Audubon, and the guide to mushrooms. And but the complete Mushroom Hunters book was really educates you on everything, right? From what mushrooms are in different cultures around the world to the parts of the mushrooms to what are the most common mushrooms you're going to find, which ones can you eat. Here's some recipes for how you would cook them. He covers everything in that book, and it's just a perfect little introduction. So that's how I would start out, and then take a look at a book like that and then head out in the woods. I personally am a big proponent of joining a club. Some people are just not into joining things, but if you join a club, there's millions of people you can ask questions of, and you have the opportunity to learn at a much faster rate. And there's clubs on the internet, there's clubs in person, there's all kinds of clubs, and they're always cheap to join. Like the
Mhm.
Boston Mycological Club is, I think, $20 a year or $10 for students. It's really, really cheap. That's for the whole year, all these walks and everything else. And every other club is like that too. I belong to about 10 or 15 different clubs because if I'm going to go to a new part of the country, like we were taking a trip up to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so I joined the Ann Arbor Club. I said, well, let's see what
Mhm.
they're all about. And, when we were out there, they were going on a walk. So I joined the club, and it was $6 to join as an out-of-state member. And I got to go on the walk with them when I was out there and
Mhm.
learn a whole new area, all new mushrooms. And I belong to the Long Island Club. I belong to the Asheville, North Carolina club. So I belong to clubs all over the place. And, usually get a newsletter, you get stuff about what's going on in that part of the world. And, if we have really dry summer, it can be fun to read about some place where there are mushrooms.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for taking the
Sure.
time to speak with me today.
Well, thank you for what you're doing. There's so few people, especially at your age, that are really
Yeah,
pushing
for sure.
mycology, and it's the only time I ever see it really exist in education is really at like the agricultural schools. They'll usually have sections on mycology because they figure people want to maybe grow mushrooms, but it's very underrepresented in the world of education, and it's changing because people are asking for it. So, hopefully we'll be different in the
Yeah,
future.
I really hope so.
Yeah. I thank you for what you're doing. And it's really, you have a great site, and I hope people all visit it and check out the videos and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
well, it's the same as me. Like you don't have time to be doing what you're doing, but you can't stop yourself.
Mhm.
I know the feeling. Yeah. But so I'm glad you can join us on walks, and with the BMC too, we tell people if you want to see what it's all about, you can come on a walk for free. You don't have to join.
Joining your foraging walks is always very informative.
Yeah, yeah,
even though,
it's
yeah.
the best way to learn fast because visually you see them, you touch them, you smell them,
Mm.
you know, you get a feel for what everything is going on, and it's a much better way to learn.